This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter. Toronto, Ontario, October 2006. Rainbow Valley by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 34. Una visits the hill. Una went upstairs. Carl and Faith were already on their way through the early moonlight to Rainbow Valley, having heard therefrom the elfin lilt of Jerry's Jew-harp, and having guessed that the Blythes were there, and fun afoot. Una had no wish to go. She sought her own room first, where she sat down on her bed and had a little cry. She did not want anybody to come in her dear mother's place. She did not want a stepmother who would hate her and make her father hate her. But father was so desperately unhappy, and if she could do anything to make him happier, she must do it. There was only one thing she could do, and she had known the moment she had left the study that she must do it. But it was a very hard thing to do. After Una cried her heart out, she wiped her eyes and went to the spare room. It was dark and rather musty, for the blind had not been drawn up, nor the window opened for a long time. Aunt Martha was no fresh-air fiend. But as nobody ever thought of shutting a door in the manse, this did not matter so much, save when some unfortunate minister came to stay all night, and was compelled to breathe the spare-room atmosphere. There was a closet in the spare room, and far back in the closet a grey silk dress was hanging. Una went into the closet and shut the door, went down on her knees, and pressed her face against the soft silken folds. It had been her mother's wedding dress. It was still full of a sweet, faint, haunting perfume, like lingering love. Una always felt very close to her mother there, as if she were kneeling at her feet, with head in her lap. She went there once in a long while, when life was too hard. "Mother," she whispered to the grey silk gown, "I will never forget you, Mother, and I'll always love you best. But I have to do it, Mother, because Father is so very unhappy. I know you wouldn't want him to be unhappy. And I will be very good to her, Mother, and try to love her, even if she is, like Mary Vance said stepmothers always were." Una carried some fine spiritual strength away from her secret shrine. She slept peacefully that night, with the tear-stains still glistening on her sweet, serious little face. The next afternoon she put on her best dress and hat. They were shabby enough. Every other girl in the glen had new clothes that summer, except Faith and Una. Mary Vance had a lovely dress of white embroidered lawn, with scarlet silk sash and shoulder bows. But today Una did not mind her shabbiness. She only wanted to be very neat. She washed her face carefully. She brushed her black hair until it was as smooth as satin. She tied her shoelaces carefully, having first sewed up 2 runs in her one pair of good stockings. She would have liked to black her shoes, but she could not find any blacking. Finally she slipped away from the manse, down through Rainbow Valley, up through the whispering woods, and out to the road that ran past the house on the hill. It was quite a long walk, and Una was tired and warm when she got there. She saw Rosemary West sitting under a tree in the garden, and stole past the dahlia beds to her. Rosemary had a book in her lap, but she was gazing afar across the harbour, and her thoughts were sorrowful enough. Life had not been pleasant lately in the house on the hill. Ellen had not sulked. Ellen had been a brick. But things can be felt that are never said, and at times the silence between the two women was intolerably eloquent. All the many familiar things that had once made life sweet had a flavour of bitterness now. Norman Douglas made periodical irruptions also, bullying and coaxing Ellen by turns. It would end, Rosemary believed, by his dragging Ellen off with him some day, and Rosemary felt that she would be almost glad when it happened. Existence would be horribly lonely then, but it would be no longer charged with dynamite. She was roused from her unpleasant reverie by a timid little touch on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Una Meredith. "Why, Una dear, did you walk up here in all this heat?" "Yes," said Una. I came to... But she found it very hard to say what she had come to do. Her voice failed. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why, Una, little girl, what is the trouble? Don't be afraid to tell me." Rosemary put her arm around the thin little form and drew the child close to her. Her eyes were very beautiful, her touch so tender that Una found courage. "I came to ask you to marry Father," she gasped. Rosemary was silent for a moment from sheer dumbfounderment. She stared at Una blankly. "Oh, don't be angry, please, dear Miss West," said Una pleadingly. "You see, everybody is saying that you wouldn't marry Father because we are so bad. He is very unhappy about it. So I thought I would come and tell you that we are never bad on purpose. And if you will only marry Father, we will all try to be good and do just what you tell us. I'm sure you won't have any trouble with us. Please, Miss West." Rosemary had been thinking rapidly. Gossiping surmise, she saw, had put this mistaken idea into Una's mind. She must be perfectly frank and sincere with the child. "Una dear," she said softly, "it isn't because of you poor little souls that I cannot be your father's wife. I never thought of such a thing. You are not bad. I never supposed you were. There was another reason altogether, Una." "Don't you like Father?" asked Una, lifting reproachful eyes. "Oh, Miss West, you don't know how nice he is. I'm sure he'd make you a good husband." Even in the midst of her perplexity and distress, Rosemary couldn't help a twisted little smile. "Oh, don't laugh, Miss West," Una cried passionately. "Father feels dreadful about it." "I think you're mistaken, dear," said Rosemary. "I'm not. I'm sure I'm not. Oh, Miss West, Father was going to whip Carl yesterday. Carl had been naughty, and Father couldn't do it because you see he had no practice in whipping. So when Carl came out and told us Father felt so bad, I slipped into the study to see if I could help him. He likes me to comfort him, Miss West, and he didn't hear me come in, and I heard what he was saying. I'll tell you, Miss West, if you'll let me whisper it in your ear." Una whispered earnestly. Rosemary's face turned crimson. So John Meredith still cared. He hadn't changed his mind. And he must care intensely if he had said that. Care more than she had ever supposed he did. She sat still for a moment, stroking Una's hair. Then she said, "Will you take a little letter from me to your father, Una?" "Oh, are you going to marry him, Miss West?" asked Una eagerly. "Perhaps, if he really wants me to," said Rosemary, blushing again. I'm glad," said Una bravely. Then she looked up, with quivering lips. "Oh, Miss West, you won't turn Father against us. You won't make him hate us, will you?" she said beseechingly. Rosemary stared again. "Una Meredith, do you think I would do such a thing? Whatever put such an idea into your head?" "Mary Vance said stepmothers were all like that, and that they all hated their stepchildren and made their father hate them. She said they just couldn't help it. Just being stepmothers made them like that." "You poor child. And yet you came up here and asked me to marry your father because you wanted to make him happy? You're a darling, a heroine, as Ellen would say. You're a brick. Now listen to me very closely, dearest. Mary Vance is a silly little girl who doesn't know very much, and she is dreadfully mistaken about some things. I would never dream of trying to turn your father against you. I would love you all dearly. I don't want to take your own mother's place. She must always have that in your hearts. But neither have I any intention of being a stepmother. I want to be your friend and helper and chum. Don't you think that would be nice, Una, if you and Faith and Carl and Jerry could just think of me as a good jolly chum, a big older sister?" "Oh, it would be lovely!" cried Una, with a transfigured face. She flung her arms impulsively round Rosemary's neck. She was so happy that she felt as if she could fly on wings. "Do the others, do Faith and the boys have the same idea you had about stepmothers?" "No. Faith never believed Mary Vance. I was dreadfully foolish to believe her either. Faith loves you already. She has loved you ever since poor Adam was eaten. And Jerry and Carl will think it is jolly. Oh, Miss West, when you come to live with us, could you teach me to cook a little, and sew, and do things? I don't know anything. I won't be much trouble. I'll try to learn fast." "Darling, I'll teach you and help you all I can. Now you won't say a word to anybody about this, will you? Not even to Faith, until your father himself tells you you may? And you'll stay and have tea with me? Oh, thank you. But I think I'd rather go right back and take the letter to father," faltered Una. "You see, he'll be so glad that much sooner, Miss West." "I see," said Rosemary. She went to the house, wrote a note, and gave it to Una. When that small damsel had run off, a palpitating bundle of happiness, Rosemary went to Ellen, who was shelling peas on the back porch. "Ellen," she said, "Una Meredith has just been here to ask me to marry her father." Ellen looked up and read her sister's face. "And you're going to?" she said. "It's quite likely." Ellen went on shelling peas for a few minutes. Then she suddenly put her hand up to her own face. There were tears in her black-browed eyes. I hope we'll all be happy," she said, between a sob and a laugh. Down at the manse, Una Meredith, warm, rosy, triumphant, marched boldly into her father's study, and laid a letter on the desk before him. His pale face flushed as he saw the clear, fine handwriting he knew so well. He opened the letter. It was very short, but he shed 20 years as he read it. Rosemary asked him if he could meet her that evening at sunset by the spring in Rainbow Valley. End of chapter 34. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter. Toronto, Ontario, October 2006. Rainbow Valley by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 35. Let the Piper Come. "And so," said Miss Cornelia, "the double wedding is to be some time about the middle of this month." There was a faint chill in the air of the early September evening, so Anne had lighted her ever-ready fire of driftwood in the big living-room, and she and Miss Cornelia basked in its fairy flicker. "It is so delightful, especially in regard to Mr. Meredith and Rosemary," said Anne. "I'm as happy in the thought of it as I was when I was getting married myself. I felt exactly like a bride again last evening when I was up on the hill seeing Rosemary's trousseau." "They tell me her things are fine enough for a princess," said Susan, from a shadowy corner where she was cuddling her brown boy. "I have been invited up to see them also, and I intend to go some evening. I understand that Rosemary is to wear white silk and a veil, but Ellen is to be married in navy blue. I have no doubt, Mrs. Dr. dear, that that is very sensible of her, but for my own part, I have always felt that if I were ever married, I would prefer the white and the veil, as being more bride-like." A vision of Susan in white and a veil presented itself before Anne's inner vision, and was almost too much for her. "As for Mr. Meredith," said Miss Cornelia, "even his engagement has made a different man of him. He isn't half so dreamy and absent-minded, believe me. I was so relieved when I heard that he had decided to close the manse, and let the children visit round while he was away on his honeymoon. If he had left them and old Aunt Martha there alone for a month, I should have expected to wake every morning and see the place burned down." "Aunt Martha and Jerry are coming here," said Anne. "Carl is going to Elder Clow's. I haven't heard where the girls are going." "Oh, I'm going to take them," said Miss Cornelia. "Of course I was glad to, but Mary wouldn't have given me no peace till I asked them anyway. The Ladies' Aid is going to clean the manse from top to bottom before the bride and groom come back, and Norman Douglas has arranged to fill the cellar with vegetables. Nobody ever saw or heard anything quite like Norman Douglas these days, believe me. He's so tickled that he's going to marry Ellen West after wanting her all his life. If I was Ellen, but then I'm not, and if she is satisfied, I can very well be. I heard her say years ago when she was a schoolgirl that she didn't want a tame puppy for a husband. There's nothing tame about Norman, believe me." The sun was setting over Rainbow Valley. The pond was wearing a wonderful tissue of purple and gold and green and crimson. A faint blue haze rested on the eastern hill, over which a great pale round moon was just floating up like a silver bubble. They were all there, squatted in the little open glade: Faith and Una, Jerry and Carl, Jem and Walter, Nan and Di, and Mary Vance. They had been having a special celebration, for it would be Jem's last evening in Rainbow Valley. On the morrow he would leave for Charlottetown to attend Queen's Academy. Their charmed circle would be broken, and in spite of the jollity of their little festival, there was a hint of sorrow in every gay young heart. "See, there is a great golden palace over there in the sunset," said Walter, pointing. "Look at the shining towers, and the crimson banners streaming from them. Perhaps a conqueror is riding home from battle, and they are hanging them out to do honor to him." "Oh, I wish we had the old days back again," exclaimed Jem. "I'd love to be a soldier, a great triumphant general. I'd give everything to see a big battle." Well, Jem was to be a soldier, and see a greater battle than had ever been fought in the world, but that was as yet far in the future. And the mother, whose first-born son he was wont to look on her boys, and thank God that the brave days of old, which Jem longed for, were gone forever, and that never would it be necessary for the sons of Canada to ride forth to battle, for the ashes of their fathers and the temples of their gods. The shadow of the great conflict had not yet made felt any forerunner of its chill. The lads who were to fight, and perhaps fall, on the fields of France and Flanders, Gallipoli and Palestine, were still roguish schoolboys, with a fair life in prospect before them. The girls whose hearts were to be wrung were yet fair little maidens, astar with hopes and dreams. Slowly the banners of the Sunset City gave up their crimson and gold. Slowly the conqueror's pageant faded out. Twilight crept over the valley, and the little group grew silent. Walter had been reading again that day in his beloved book of myths, and he remembered how he had once fancied the Pied Piper coming down the valley on an evening just like this. He began to speak dreamily, partly because he wanted to thrill his companions a little, partly because something apart from him seemed to be speaking through his lips. "The Piper is coming nearer," he said. "He is nearer than he was that evening I saw him before. His long shadowy cloak is blowing around him. He pipes, and we must follow. Jem and Carl and Jerry and I, round and round the world. Listen, listen. Can't you hear his wild music?" The girls shivered. "You know you're only pretending," protested Mary Vance, "and I wish you wouldn't. You make it too real. I hate that old piper of yours." But Jem sprang up with a gay laugh. He stood up on a little hillock, tall and splendid, with his open brow and his fearless eyes. There were thousands like him all over the land of the maple. "Let the piper come, and welcome," he cried, waving his hand. "I'll follow him gladly, round and round the world." End of chapter 35. End of Rainbow Valley.